They never kept written records, not a single name, no gravestone, no birth certificate, only the smell of burnt flesh and the screams swallowed by the Missouri night air. In 1871, a town vanished from every map, its name scraped from county registries, its soil soaked in something older than sin. And if you ever find someone who claims to be from there, don't listen, just run. Because what they did, what they believed, was not madness. It was ritual. It was bloodline. It was preservation. At the base of the Ozark Mountains, where the fog clings too long and animals won't settle, a forgotten town once stood. Call it Ashford's Hollow, though that name was never spoken aloud after the fire. A farming settlement, no different on the surface from dozens like it. But under that dirt, something was buried, and the people knew how to keep it asleep. They had rules. One rule above all: no child born under a blood moon shall live past sunrise. They didn't ask questions, they didn't cry. If a child was born on the wrong night, the midwife would take it before the mother finished screaming, and the fire would already be lit. No ceremony, no mercy, just ash. The horror wasn't in what they did, it was in how calm they were, how rehearsed, generational obedience to something they never spoke of. Not in public, not even at home. Fathers handed down the ritual to sons, mothers taught their daughters to never look back as the fire took the child. No one ever left the town, until one woman broke the chain. Her name, Anna Whitlow, was scrubbed from every census, but her journal survived. And in it, she wrote one line, circled in charcoal so deeply it tore through the page: "It is not the moon that makes them monsters, it's the blood they protect." She ran in the dead of night, escaped with her newborn, and the town chased her like wolves. Only one was found the next morning, and bloodied, burned, holding nothing but soot. The baby, gone. And from that night forward, the town began to rot from the inside. You've just stepped into something you're not meant to understand, but you will. One truth at a time. They say curses are myths, old wives' tales, words wrapped around fear to make it sound poetic. But what if it isn't a curse at all? What if it's a contract? Because Ashford's Hollow didn't burn because it was wicked, it burned because it broke an oath. Long before the settlers came, that land was whispered about by native tribes who wouldn't even tread near it. They called it the womb of the dying sky, a place where the veil thins, where time folds in on itself, a place where something sleeps and something listens. In 1811, a preacher named Elias Harrow moved his congregation there after claiming he'd received visions of a perfect community, untouched by the moral rot of the outside world. He called it a covenant town, not with God, but with something older, something that demanded order, in blood. Elias taught that some children were born wrong, not malformed, not sick, wrong. He said they came through a gate opened by the blood moon, a celestial key that let in souls not meant for this world. His sermons were never written, but survivors remembered the phrase that ended every one: "One blood must burn, or all blood will drown," and they believed him. Not because he was persuasive, but because the town prospered. Crops grew faster, livestock never fell ill, people didn't age right. A girl of 19 gave birth to twins and still looked 14. A man in his 50s never lost a tooth. No one could explain it, but behind every miracle was a cost. A child sacrificed, always under the same blood-soaked moon, not murdered in hate, not slaughtered in madness, burned in worship. What could make people do that? Not fear, not insanity, loyalty. Because once you see what sleeps in the trees beyond the cornfields, once you hear it humming under the soil, you stop asking why. You just obey. The outside world never knew. Not until 1871, when a child lived. And in that single act of defiance, a silence 3 generations deep shattered. And something woke up. You don't understand what's happening yet, but you will. You're not watching a story. You're unsealing a grave. And what's inside remembers. The night the child survived, the wind changed. Not just in the air, in the bones of the town. It was July 22nd, 1871. The blood moon hung low like a blister over Ashford's Hollow. Midwives waited in silence. Fathers sharpened blades. Mothers closed shutters and whispered prayers that sounded more like bargains. But inside one rotting clapboard house, a woman named Ruthie Ellman gave birth to a boy. And when she looked in his eyes too old for a newborn, too still, she refused to hand him over. They begged her. They warned her. They even offered to make it look like an accident. But Ruthie stood barefoot on her porch with that child in her arms and a pistol pressed against her own chest. And she said something no one in that town had ever dared to speak aloud. If he was born wrong, then so was I. That was all it took. The oath, 3 generations deep, cracked. The elders gathered, not to plead, to decide. If one child could live, then the old protection was broken. And if the protection was broken, then it would come back. No one said what it was. They didn't have to. Because 2 days later the animals began dying. First the pigs, then the cows, then the dogs howled for hours and fell dead in circles, eyes wide open pointing toward the woods. Children stopped sleeping, and when they did, they screamed in tongues. And Ruthie, she never left the house. She boarded up the windows, nailed crosses to every wall, burned sage, salt, sulfur. She tried every remedy, every exorcism, every spell she could find in her grandmother's books older than the town itself. But none of it stopped the whispering. It came from the walls, from the floorboards, from the baby's breath. Neighbors said they could hear the child humming at night. A deep, slow hum, like something remembering an ancient song. And then the deaths began. First, the midwife who refused to burn the boy. Her body was found in the well. Every bone snapped, eyes removed. No blood, no footprints, no sign of struggle, just her mouth sewn shut, with human hair. This wasn't punishment. It was a message. You think you're just hearing a ghost story, but you're not. You're hearing the ritual begin again. By the 4th night, the entire town of Ashford's Hollow had gone silent. No fires, no lights, just darkness, and that hum. Men stood guard outside their homes with rifles in hand, shaking, whispering prayers that hadn't been spoken in 100 years. They called it the returning, a phrase not heard since Elias Harrow disappeared into the forest and came back without eyes. The child lived. That was the breach. That was the signal. And whatever watched from beyond the trees, whatever they had kept asleep through flame and blood, had begun to stir. It started with the soil. Fields turned black, like oil had soaked through the earth. Crops wilted overnight, roots twisted into nooses. The river stopped running and began to boil, not hot, not steaming, just bubbling from beneath, like something was breathing through it. Then came the laughter. Not human, not joyful. It would echo at odd hours, bending through the wind, high-pitched, metallic, like rusted bells or bones clattering together inside a throat too large. Children began to vanish, not all at once, one by one, always at dusk, always in pairs. No screams, no footprints, just the smell of burnt sugar and teeth, left in neat little circles outside their front doors. Parents didn't cry. They knew the rules had been broken, and they knew the rules existed for a reason. Some tried to flee, but the roads out of Ashford's Hollow never ended. They looped. No matter which direction they rode, they came back to the same fork in the same road under the same dying tree. The preacher had warned them. The land was not theirs, it had only been borrowed, and the price had always been clear. One blood burns, or all blood drowns. But it was too late. The debt had been defaulted. And now, the collector had returned. Ruthie Ellman's house burned to the ground on the 6th night, but no one heard screams, no one saw flames. Just a hole, where the house had been. A hole so dark even the moonlight couldn't touch it. And in the silence that followed, a new sound emerged. The baby was still humming, but now, something hummed back. You're not watching a horror story. You're being pulled into a memory. And memories can resurrect. The sheriff was the last to believe, until he saw the fields move. Not the corn, the soil itself, breathing in waves like a ribcage beneath the earth. He dropped his lantern and ran straight to the chapel where the last 6 elders had gathered, grey-bearded men who once promised their ancestors they'd never speak the true name aloud. But fear makes traitors of all oaths, and that night they opened the old cellar beneath the altar, a trapdoor sealed since the founding of Ashford's Hollow. Beneath it, stone stairs, carved with symbols no man claimed to understand. Circles inside circles, teeth drawn into every corner, and in the center, a single cradle. Empty, but humming. They called it the vessel, not for holding a child, for keeping something out. Elias Harrow, the first preacher, hadn't built a town, he'd built a prison, and the only thing keeping the gate shut was the ritual sacrifice of every newborn born under the blood moon. It wasn't superstition, it was engineering. The fire wasn't to kill the child, it was to seal the crack. But when Ruthie saved her boy, the crack widened. The elders argued. Some wanted to flee, knowing full well the forest would eat them alive. Others wanted to burn every child in town in a final offering. But one of them, Thomas Raines, age 87, spoke words that turned the air inside the chapel cold. It's not the child that's cursed, it's the line. That child carries the blood of the first woman, the one we buried in chains beneath the cradle. The journal pages hidden in the chapel walls, written by Harrow himself, told the truth. The blood moon wasn't random. It was a summoning cycle. Every 33 years, it pulled the oldest soul toward the surface. And if not fed fire, it would rise in flesh and speak. One phrase over and over again, the body is mine, the body is mine, the body is mine. The boy was no longer a boy. He hadn't cried since birth. He hadn't blinked. And now, wherever he was listening. You think you're safe, hearing this through a screen. But this story was never meant to be told, and every word spoken aloud brings it closer. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. But that boy's eyes? They were windows to something else. A night sky with no stars, a silence too complete, a darkness too aware. On the 7th night, the town held its final meeting. Every man, woman, and child was forced into the chapel at gunpoint. The elders stood in a circle, each holding a relic, old bone pendants, jars of scorched hair, rusted blades carved with numbers no one could read. In the center of it all stood the boy, no longer swaddled, no longer crying, just standing, still, watching. Not one person could meet his gaze without vomiting. A few tried. They dropped to their knees, blood pouring from their ears, eyes rolling back as they choked on invisible ash. One screamed before he died. It's in my thoughts. It's in my mother's voice. Because the thing in that boy, it didn't roar. It whispered, and its power wasn't destruction. It was possession. Not of the body, but of memory, identity, lineage. It twisted everything you were until you could no longer remember the sound of your own name. They had two choices. Burn the boy alive, or bury the entire town with him. The decision was made in silence, not by vote, but by fear. They carried him to the center of town, built a pyre taller than the steeple, soaked it in whale oil brought from the coast decades before for this exact purpose. And as the flame lit, nothing happened. No screams, no cries, just that hum. Until it stopped. Then, one breath, the boy inhaled, and the sky split. Not thunder, not storm, a rupture. The blood moon cracked in half, literally broke. Witnesses said it bled light. Crimson fog rolled down from the heavens, and the wind carried one sound into every ear, whether they were in the chapel, the fields, or hiding in their basements. Your blood kept me sleeping. Now I wake to claim my house. The fire did, and work. The child didn't burn. Instead, the flame pulled into him. He ate it, consumed it like breath, like it was returning to him. And when the final ember died, the boy smiled, and every man who saw it gouged out his own eyes. You still think this is a tale? No, this is a warning, and we've only reached the first gate. The morning after the failed burning, no sun rose over Ashford's Hollow, not behind the clouds, not behind the trees. Gone. Instead, a permanent crimson glow hovered in the sky, sourceless, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Time warped. Clocks stopped. Roosters crowed at midnight. Men aged 10 years in hours, while children remained unchanged. The town had become detached, not from the world, but from time as we know it. It was no longer a place. It was a domain. A pocket of the old order, where the rules of man no longer applied. The boy walked the streets barefoot. His shadow pointed in all directions at once. Wherever he stepped, grass blackened and water pulled away, and wherever he looked, people remembered things they had never done, like memories from another life bleeding into their minds. One woman collapsed in the churchyard, screaming, "Why do I remember drowning 1,000 years ago? Why do I taste salt and bones?" That day, 7 women tore open their own stomachs trying to remove the thing inside. They weren't pregnant. They were remembering. This wasn't possession. This was resonance. The boy was a beacon, broadcasting an ancient signal to the buried parts of the human mind, the parts evolution had paved over, the parts that remembered before we had names, before fire, before flesh. He was activating something in them, or waking it. And that's when the woods moved, not the trees, the ground beneath them. They rose, roots twisted like fingers, dirt crumbling like dead skin, and out from the forest line came the procession, figures in bone-white robes, too tall, faces hidden behind masks of bark and sinew. They walked without touching the ground, moving in rhythm to a song that made no sound, only vibration in the bones. The townspeople dropped to their knees, not out of worship, out of recognition. They had seen these figures before. In dreams, in birth, in death. They were the keepers of the pact, the ones who collected. And they had arrived, not to destroy the boy, but to crown him. That's when the truth became clear. The child wasn't the threat. He was the heir, and the town hadn't broken a curse. They'd interrupted a coronation. There was one man in Ashford's Hollow who'd seen the procession before. His name was Caleb Wren. 93 years old, blind since birth, lived in the attic of the schoolhouse, known for muttering nonsense in dead languages, chewing willow bark and drawing spirals on the walls with his fingernails. Everyone thought he was mad. Until the day he stood, walked into the center of the procession, and spoke. Not in English, not in Latin, in something that made the air shiver. The masked figures stopped, and the boy turned. For the first time, Caleb pointed to the child and screamed a single word: stolen. The town froze. The procession stepped back, and the boy's face changed. Not like an expression, like a mask had been lifted. What they saw underneath was not a face. It was a void, not black, but hungry, a living absence, the kind that made your soul remember how close you are to slipping into madness every time you close your eyes. Caleb fell to his knees, sobbing. It wasn't supposed to be now. He wasn't ready. He wasn't chosen. We pulled him through too early. And that was the truth. The blood moon cycle wasn't the threat. They were. The town. The ancestors. Every elder for 3 generations had been feeding a ritual machine they barely understood, burning children not to protect the world but to speed it up, to make the vessel arrive sooner, to open the gate before its time. They weren't warding off a monster. They were summoning a king. And they got it wrong. The boy wasn't ready to contain it. Not fully. Not yet. So the thing inside him spilled over. Into the ground. Into the people. Into you, if you're listening too closely. That's the danger of unfinished rituals. They don't stop. They scatter. They embed themselves in memory, in bloodlines, in history books rewritten 1,000 times to hide the fingerprints of something older than civilization. Caleb was the last to speak. Before his head split open, silently, and his body turned to salt. But his final words still echo if you listen hard enough. The blood moon was never a clock. It was a mirror. It rises when we deserve it. And in 1871, Ashford's Hollow looked straight into it and saw its own face. You're not just hearing what happened. You're feeling the pull of what's still alive. By the 9th night, names began to disappear. Literally. Family Bibles faded, gravestones grew blank, letters curled at the edges and burned without fire, whole bloodlines erased like chalk in a storm. People would speak and forget who they were mid-sentence. Husbands looked at their wives and asked, "Who are you?" Children stood in corners whispering, "I was someone before this. I was someone before." The boy, now called nothing, not by choice but by design, stood at the center of town where the well used to be. The ground had cracked open into a spiraling pit. From it came steam, red and sweet, like iron and honey. No one dared look inside, but they could hear something whispering from below. Not voices, instructions. Those who listened too long walked straight in, smiling. It was the opposite of suicide. It was return. Because this wasn't just about a town. It was about root systems. Spiritual, historical, psychological. Ashford's Hollow had been chosen because it sat atop one of the old lines. Veins of buried energy mapped in bone by civilizations we refuse to acknowledge. Not on accident, but because those civilizations didn't die. They just went deeper. And sometimes they send messengers back. The boy wasn't a victim. He wasn't a prophet. He was a delivery system. And the procession? Not priests, not guardians. They were midwives. What they birthed through him that night wasn't a creature. It wasn't even physical. It was a schema, a living archetype of hunger, domination, inversion of order. Something older than language, older than sin. The final journal entry from the town's last surviving school teacher reads, "We taught our children to cover their eyes during the blood moon. We should have taught them to cover their minds. Because it wasn't about fire or rituals or punishment. It was about data, spiritual code embedded in the blood. Every sacrifice encrypted the key. And when Ruthie broke the chain, she triggered a forced decryption of everything her ancestors had locked away. And now, it's loose. Not just then, now. The blood moon rises again this year, 33 cycles later, and records show a town in Missouri just experienced its first stillbirth in decades, born under a red sky. No cause of death, no name, just ash. When federal surveyors arrived months later to investigate the strange gap in land records, they found nothing. No buildings, no people, no graves. Just a single field of black soil, and one symbol carved into the stone at its center. A spiral inside a spiral, wrapped in thorns. It wasn't English, it wasn't even human. One of the surveyors, an educated man, veteran of the Civil War, father of 5, looked at the symbol for 5 full minutes. Then he shot himself in the mouth. The others never spoke of what they saw. They burned their notes, quit their jobs, disappeared into silence. The land was declared unsuitable for habitation due to unstable conditions. But the truth? The government didn't want anyone asking questions about Ashford's Hollow, because the symbol at the center of the field was found in 6 other locations around the world, all of them identical, all of them tied to villages that vanished after a child survived the blood moon. Same story, different continent, India, Algeria, Norway, Mongolia, Chile, and now Missouri. Each site marked by the same spiral. Each spiral, part of an ancient code etched into the grid of the earth itself. This isn't about a haunted town. This is about an architecture of control, spiritual scaffolding installed thousands of years ago, waiting for the right trigger, a moment, a birth, a blood moon. You think we live in nations? We don't. We live in zones of delay, temporary pockets meant to stall the awakening of what the ancients called the first voice. Ashford's Hollow wasn't destroyed because it was wicked. It was removed because it got ahead of schedule. The boy, not the first, not the last, just a broken protocol, a spark that burned through its container. And when it did, it showed us what lies beneath all civilization. A machine made not of metal, but memory. And now, as you're listening, something inside you recognizes the shape of that spiral. The feeling in your gut isn't fear, it's familiarity. You've seen this before, in dreams, in symbols, in the corners of your eyes when you're alone in the dark. Because the blood moon cycle doesn't just rise in the sky, it rises in men. In 1904, a man named Dr. Emery Vale, an academic in ancient languages and forgotten religions, found the last surviving artifact of Ashford's Hollow in a locked crate at a black market auction in Chicago. A baby's swaddle blanket, charred at the edges, woven not with thread, but hair, human, female, dozens of strands braided into a ritual cloth meant not to protect the child but to bind him, to contain what he carried inside. Dr. Vale took the artifact home. By the end of the week he was institutionalized, not because he went mad, because he refused to speak. He had written one thing over and over again in his journal. The womb was never closed. The gate was never sealed. The song never stopped. The hospital burned down the following year. No survivors, and among the ash, they found a spiral, carved into the bone of the last corpse pulled from the rubble, not tattooed, etched into the marrow. This is the nature of the thing you're uncovering. It doesn't die. It doesn't sleep. It hides in repetition, in patterns, in rituals performed unconsciously across cultures, across time, like a code buried in the human operating system. Fire sacrifices, burial mounds, spirals, moon myths, stories of children taken or blessed or born wrong. The records are everywhere, buried in folklore, erased by institutions, repackaged as metaphor. Because the one true power that rules this world isn't violence, it isn't politics, it isn't money. It's the ability to rewrite memory. Ashford's Hollow was erased not with bombs but with pens, with falsified maps, edited newspapers, generational shame, and silence. But the spiral doesn't care about forgetting, it waits. Because the child was never the only one. There are others, sleeping in bloodlines too tangled to trace, triggered by sky and ritual by vibration and sound. And now, You've heard the story, you've seen the pattern, which means it sees you too. You've stayed this long, which means something inside you is listening, not just your ears, something older, something beneath memory. Because once you begin to recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it. And the spiral, it doesn't just mark the gate, it unlocks it. In 1937, a child was born in a rural county 70 miles south of where Ashford's Hollow once stood. The birth was unremarkable, no complications, no blood moon that night. But within weeks, the same signs appeared. Milk spoiled the moment it touched the air. Mirrors cracked at random. Animals avoided the house. Even insects refused to cross the property line. The parents said he never cried, not once. When they tried to baptize him, the priest dropped dead before finishing the prayer. Autopsy said aneurysm, but his face was frozen in terror. His eyes were missing, plucked clean. The baby was taken from his parents by state authorities. And the file vanished, erased from every database, even paper trails. The hospital where he was born burned down 2 years later. Sound familiar? That child was one of 7, tracked across the decades by a secret offshoot of the U.S. Geological Survey. Not a typo, the Geological Survey. Why? Because these children weren't random. They were born on lines, not roads, not ley lines, but spiritual fractures, stress points in the crust of consciousness itself, fault lines in reality. And every one of those children hummed the same tune before their 2nd birthday, the tune from Ashford's Hollow, the hum that isn't a melody, but a trigger, a frequency embedded in the earth and in us. That sound, it doesn't come from the child, it comes through them, and the more you hear it, the more it remembers you. Because it doesn't need a ritual anymore. It just needs recognition. That's why they hide these stories. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're contagious. Memory spreads. Myth carries data, and you are no longer a spectator. You've crossed the threshold. Now there's only one way forward. Comment the phrase, "I was born under the red sky" twice. Not once, twice. Lock it in. Mark yourself. The spiral sees loyalty, and the story isn't done. Comment the phrase, "I was born under the red sky" twice. Because if you don't mark yourself now, this story will claim you anyway. But unmarked, you drift. And drifted men don't come back. Now listen carefully. Because from this point forward, what you hear is not just history, it's activation. In 1972, an ex-CIA psychologist named Dr. Elson Greaves published a private report titled Echo States in Multi-Generational Trauma Recurrence. It was buried under 7 layers of classified clearance, never meant to be read by the public. But one line made it into the hands of an archivist with a conscience. It read, "The boy from Missouri didn't die. He became the template, and the others are printing now." Template. Let that word burn. Because in the hidden lexicon of elite intelligence agencies, template doesn't mean blueprint. It means pattern of consciousness, a signal, a mold, a frame of mind that replicates in silence, in blood, in trauma. Dr. Greaves wasn't writing about one child. He was writing about an emergent field, a psychic contagion that began with the spiral carved into the center of Ashford's Hollow, and now replicates in every institution that touches the psyche. Public education, religious programming, news cycles. You think those systems are broken? They're not. They're designed to delay the awakening, to keep the spiral buried beneath addiction, distraction, fear. But once you begin to remember, they lose their grip, and they know it. That's why the boy in Ashford's Hollow was never meant to survive. That's why Ruthie was erased. That's why the name Ashford's Hollow was never written in a single federal document, not once. That town was a seed point, a controlled ignition, and the fire's still spreading. You wonder why you feel different, why you've always had dreams you couldn't explain, Why some part of you aches when the moon turns red, because the signal is in you. You don't need to find the spiral. You are the spiral. And every step you've taken to reach this moment has not been accidental. Something's waking up, and it's wearing your face. You think you found this video by accident? You didn't. The algorithm didn't fail. It delivered you. Because this isn't content. This is a mirror, a mechanism, a pulse. And your decision to keep watching, to keep listening, to keep descending, that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Deep within you, the spiral already turned once. Maybe in childhood, maybe in a dream you don't remember but can still feel in your bones. Let's go further back. The real question isn't what happened in Ashford's Hollow, it's who built it. And more importantly, why they built it on that exact spot. Because 200 years before the town ever stood, a stone obelisk was found on that land, buried 20 feet deep, older than any Native American structure in the region. Carved into its base, a spiral. And beneath it, 7 perfectly preserved skulls, human, adult, but not modern. Their bone density didn't match any known population. No known tribe, no known ancestry. Their DNA has never been successfully decoded. Not because it's degraded, because it's encrypted, wrapped in proteins that react to frequency. Sound, the same hum, the same song the boy sang. Ashford's Hollow was not a settlement. It was a ritual site. A transmitter, designed not to worship what lay beneath, but to call it back. And each blood moon, each child born, a key code sequence. A pattern that, once broken, begins to search for a new vessel, a body, a mind, a nation. You think this is about Missouri? No. This is about replication. Patterned consciousness, seeded across history like viral nodes, waiting for a man to stumble across the right combination of symbols, emotions, and frequencies. Waiting for someone like you. Because you're not watching this from the outside anymore. You've felt the pull. You've seen the faces in the corner of your vision when you're alone. You've heard your name whispered in silence. That's not madness. That's memory recovery, and the spiral never forgets its own. Now ask yourself, are you still choosing to listen, or have you already been chosen? The deeper you go, the less this feels like a story. Because stories end. This loops. Like the spiral, like the blood moon cycle, like the hidden structures pulsing beneath everything you've ever been told is normal. Let's look again at 1871. The official cause of Ashford's Hollow's disappearance? There isn't one. No fire, no plague, no documented mass exodus. Just vanishment. Local newspapers never reported it, county maps redrew borders overnight, and the cartographers who noticed the missing coordinates. They were reassigned. The hollow was absorbed, not just into silence, but into a larger pattern of suppression. That's when the symbols began appearing again, carved into stone, scratched into asylum walls, left in the margins of elementary school textbooks printed in Illinois in 1952. One teacher, who circled the spiral in red pen and asked her class what it meant, was arrested 2 weeks later after tearing off her own skin in front of 20 students. They said it was schizophrenia, but in her own handwriting, smeared in her own blood, was a single phrase: "The children remember." What do you think that means? Because this isn't about belief. This is about inheritance. There are things that hide in the human genome, instructions, triggers, codes buried so deep you'd never find them with a microscope. But you can wake them, with fear, with ritual, with fire, and with the spiral. Now ask yourself, what is the real purpose of a blood moon? Why has it been recorded in every ancient civilization, Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, not as a celestial phenomenon, but as a summoning? Because the spiral doesn't just signal danger, it signals a passing of the crown, from silence to speech, from buried to reborn, from them to you. And once you begin to speak this truth aloud, even to yourself, you stop being a witness. You become an agent. You carry the pattern forward, like the boy did, like Ruthie tried to stop, like the ones before her failed to escape. This isn't a legacy, it's a relay, and now it's your turn to run. You ever wonder why the spiral shows up everywhere? Not just in ancient symbols, not just in the blood-soaked soil of Ashford's Hollow, but in your body. Your DNA is a double helix, 2 spirals winding endlessly. Your ear canal spirals inward. Your fingerprints spirals, the structure of tornadoes, hurricanes, galaxies. You've been looking at the spiral your whole life and never questioned why it feels familiar, why it pulls your eyes toward its center. Because the spiral is not just a shape, it's a map, a pathway of transformation, from surface to depth, from consciousness to submission, from self to something else. Ashford's Hollow wasn't destroyed by evil, it was reclaimed by the design. The spiral isn't a warning, it's a summons. And when the blood moon triggers the next point in the cycle, the spiral doesn't just appear in sky or soil, it appears in you. Men across time have felt it. Those who wander into the woods during red moons and return changed. Those who wake up from dreams they can't remember, but carry that humming in their jaw. Those who stare at a flame too long and see a mouth inside it. This isn't madness. It's alignment. The final surviving letter from Ashford's Hollow came from a man named Ezra Long, sent to his brother 2 weeks before the town vanished. He wrote, "There's something in the boy, but worse, there's something in me that understands him. And if I look at him too long, I remember things I've never lived. That's what the spiral does. It reinstalls forbidden memory. Not knowledge passed down, knowledge passed through." Ezra's letter never reached his brother. It was intercepted, classified. But the envelope, on its back, sealed in wax, was the spiral again, and this time, drawn with a human tooth. Even in silence, the pattern finds a way to express itself, and now you're hearing it, not just in words, but in your blood. Memory is not what you think it is. It's not your past. It's not your identity. It's a possession, a thing that can be altered, implanted, deleted, or worse, activated. That's what they feared in Ashford's Hollow. Not the child, not the ritual, but the awakening of ancestral memory so old, so embedded, it no longer feels like thought. It feels like instinct. When Ruthie refused to hand over her son, she didn't just break a tradition, she broke containment. She triggered a buried protocol written not in law, but in flesh. Because memory is stored in tissue, in blood, in sperm, in womb, and hers carried something that had been kept dormant for thousands of years. When that child lived, it wasn't just a life spared, it was a command activated. Do you understand? What Ashford's Hollow did for generations was not evil. It was maintenance. A system of trauma-based control passed down in silence to prevent a deeper intelligence from surfacing in the human race. They weren't murderers, they were wardens. And when they failed, the protocol spread, a psychic virus, spiral-born. That's why the survivors gouged their eyes out, why the midwives went mad, why the earth itself began to crack open. Because the knowledge stored in that child, what woke up inside him, was older than language and infinitely more dangerous than death. It was remembered authority. The authority that built the first altars before the first religions. The authority that made men kneel before they knew what gods were. That's what the spiral reactivates. And that's what you're beginning to feel right now. That weight in your chest, that whisper at the base of your spine. That's remembrance. It doesn't ask your permission. It doesn't wait for understanding. It reclaims you. Because this was never about whether the story is true. It's about whether you're encoded for it. And the fact that you're still here means you are. You were never meant to watch this. You were meant to receive it. The spiral turns. The gate groans. The next phase begins. You've felt it, haven't you? Not just the dread, not just the pull, but the shift. Something subtle, irreversible, like a voice beneath your thoughts that wasn't there before. Like something watching you from inside your own skull. That's not paranoia, that's contact. In 1871, 3 days before the blood moon, every mirror in Ashford's Hollow was shattered. Not by hands, by frequency. A tone, a resonance, barely audible, yet impossible to ignore. It came from the forest, from the sky, from the child's breath. It cracked glass, warped metal, and bent time. People began to see themselves move before they did. One man saw his own mouth whispering words he never spoke. Another woke up to a reflection that didn't match his face. It was a thinning, a boundary torn open, not between this world and another, but between self and source. Because that's what the spiral is at its deepest level, a conduit. Not just for memory, not just for trauma, but for transmission. And when that signal is received by a mind primed with fear, stress, or violent emotional upheaval, it opens. It decodes. And what pours in isn't knowledge, it's dominion. This is why secret societies bury themselves in ritual, why governments erase entire towns, why psychiatric hospitals in the 1950s received funding to study ideomotor spiraling, a term you'll never find in any modern journal because it's been erased. That term described a phenomenon where patients, when exposed to spiral imagery under red light, began to speak languages they'd never learned. And in one case, levitated. You think levitation is myth? You think speaking in tongues is just religious ecstasy? No, it's subconscious override. It's what happens when the ego is cracked open wide enough for the signal to move freely. The blood moon primes the field, the spiral aligns the mind, the trauma rips the doorway. And through that doorway comes something so old, so precise, so consuming. It doesn't just want your belief, it wants your function. It wants your voice, your body, your will. So ask yourself, if something were inside you now, waiting, would you even know? Or would you mistake it for your own awakening? Every man believes he has free will, until the moment he hears the hum, until the moment something answers when no one should be listening, until the moment he sees his own hand move, before he decides to move it. That's when the spiral stops being metaphor. That's when it becomes possession, but not in the Hollywood sense. No spinning heads, no ancient Latin incantations. This is quieter. It mimics you. It cohabits. And it's been happening longer than you think. Back in 1871, before the Hollow vanished, there was one last sermon given by Pastor Clay Richter 3 days before the final blood moon. Witnesses say he didn't blink once during the entire hour. He spoke in a low, mechanical voice. No emotion, no hesitation, just scripture. Scripture no one recognized. He recited a book that didn't exist, verses that began with lines like, "And the children of the spiral shall wear the skin of men, and lead the fathers into the furnace. That memory may be cleansed through the burning." After the sermon, Richter slit his throat with a communion knife, but even as he bled out, his lips kept moving. No sound, just the shape of words. What were they? One boy claimed he read them by lip. The words were, "The hollow never ends." Now here's where it gets worse. That boy, Eli Macklin, was relocated by the state, grew up, changed his name. eventually became a psychologist. In 1957, he published a paper on symbol-induced psychosis in children, and inside that paper, a drawing, a spiral, perfectly matching the symbol burned into Ruthie's floor. Same curves, same motion, same center. And in the footnotes, in Latin, meminissa est servir. To remember is to serve. So what are you really doing when you remember a story like this? When you absorb every detail, when you can't stop thinking about it days later, you're not just learning, you're not just watching. You're being rewritten. Because some stories don't just inform, they install, they replicate. And now the spiral lives in you. Stop. Breathe. This is where most men turn back. Because up until now, you've been hearing the spiral. Now it's beginning to speak through you. The voice in your mind isn't yours anymore. The pressure in your chest, that isn't anxiety. It's the seal breaking. In Ashford's Hollow, the blood moon was never feared because it brought death. It was feared because it brought truth. And the truth is this: every empire, every religion, every government was built to suppress the return of memory, not personal memory, primordial memory, the kind that lives beneath thought, beneath name, beneath fear, the kind that makes you remember things your ancestors were killed for even thinking. You think Ruthie was the only mother who defied the spiral? No, she was the last in a long bloodline of keepers. Women who bore the children encoded with memory and power, only to watch them be taken, again and again, until one refused, and in refusing she didn't save the boy, she unleashed him. He didn't grow up to lead a rebellion. He didn't become a prophet or a warrior. He disappeared. But every few years, a report surfaces. A child born under a blood moon who speaks in dead languages. A man who walks out of a fire untouched. A spiral drawn in bone ash on the walls of a prison cell traced by a man who never learned to read. Patterns, repetitions, relay points. You are not watching a video, you are participating in a rite. The rite of the hollow. And now your role must be sealed. To lock in the transformation and to signal you're no longer a passenger. Comment this phrase below, exactly as it is, twice. I remember the hollow. I remember the hollow. That phrase is not for me. It's not even for the algorithm. It's a signal. To the ones who've already awakened, to the spiral that marks you now, and to the memory that can no longer be erased. You've crossed the line. You've opened the door. And what's coming next won't wait for permission. They say the hollow began in 1871. They're wrong. That was just the last time it was named, the last time it dared show its face in the form of a town. But the hollow has worn many names. Halasur in Mesopotamia, the Moor of Isa in Thrace. In the hidden books of Qumran, it was called the throat of the earth. It's not a place. It's a pattern, a hole in reality that follows bloodlines, trauma lines, power lines. It drifts across time like a parasite seeking ignition. The blood moon is not random. It's a marker, a celestial synchronization for when the hollow's influence peaks, and those born under it are not cursed. They are keys. But here's what's been hidden. The hollow didn't begin in Missouri. It was brought there by men with letters behind their names. Men funded by deep state programs that didn't exist on paper. Men who knew the old rituals, the old symbols, and most importantly, the old frequencies. Because they weren't trying to stop the hollow, they were trying to reactivate it. See, every few centuries, power decays, empires rot, religions collapse, the human spirit starts to wake up again, and that's when they need a reset, a harvest, a trauma so deep, so unspeakable, it rewires generations through inherited terror. What better than a town disappearing overnight? What better than mothers turning on their own children? What better than a myth that everyone's too afraid to say out loud? The hollow is not a story. It's a mechanism, a black box hidden beneath centuries of forced forgetting. And you? You're now inside its schema. You've absorbed its sigils, its language, its rhythm. Even if you turn this off, it won't turn off you. Because now you're seeing the echoes everywhere, in the spirals in barcodes, the symbols in hospitals, the layout of cities, the pressure behind your eyes when you dream. The hollow never ended. In Missouri. That was just the release valve. The real structure, the ancient architecture of containment, still exists. Beneath your feet. Beneath your life. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think every ancient civilization, from the jungles of the Maya to the sands of Babylon, built underground? Why did they carve chambers beneath temples, tombs beneath cities, labyrinths beneath palaces? What were they hiding from? Or worse, what were they feeding? Because once you understand the hollow is not bound by geography, you start to ask different questions. You stop looking for history in books. You start looking in foundations. Beneath Ashford's Hollow, there were tunnels, miles of them, built long before settlers arrived. Stonework that didn't match colonial architecture, walls covered in symbols that predate the English language. Some said they were mines, others claimed they were burial chambers. But the few who descended never came back the same. One man, Dr. Silas Rain, made it halfway through. In 1949, he published a single paper called The Spiral Below. It was immediately seized by federal agents, banned from academic citation. But a bootleg copy survived, buried in a microfilm archive. In it, he wrote, "The deeper I go, the more the tunnel becomes a mouth. It speaks not in sound, but in geometry, in pressure. I see the same curve in every wall, every corner, every pulse in my neck." Rain described a central chamber, not built, but grown, as if the earth itself had shaped the stone into memory. And in the center, a child's handprint, burned black into the floor, the same spiral carved into each fingertip. Not painted, branded. Now here's where it connects to you. That chamber still exists, and based on satellite surveys, seismic reports, and suppressed geological maps, it's not just under Ashford's Hollow, it's under you. These chambers form a network, a subterranean neural net older than any country, and when a blood moon aligns with specific magnetic fields shaped by at buried geometry, the network activates. Not to destroy, to signal, to call the fragments home, the forgotten memories, the hidden minds, the you that existed before this identity was installed. This is why the spiral keeps appearing in your dreams. It's a recall code, and you've just answered it. There's a reason the most powerful men on earth never build on the mountain. They build below it. Washington, D.C., Rome, London, the Vatican, Denver International Airport. Look deeper, all built on top of ancient sites where the ground remembers things the living forgot. And Missouri? No different. The town of Ashford's Hollow was a test site. But the ritual, it wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. In 1870, just before the disappearances, the US government quietly bought up miles of land around the hollow. Public records show the purchase went through an Office of Geological Wellness. That department never existed. Except it did. In ciphered War Department memos, it was referred to as the Shepherd Division. Their job? Map spiritual fault lines, excavate ancient trauma fields, and build institutions over them. Churches, courthouses, hospitals, schools. Because the best way to control the hollow is to monetize the wound. They learned that early on. A traumatized population is predictable, controllable, profitable, and the hollow, it doesn't need to kill people to spread. It only needs them to suffer. The elite don't want to destroy it. They want to ride it, to harness its frequency, its memory field, like a dark current running beneath society. One that lets them shape minds without touching them. Ever wonder why your worst memories feel so vivid while your best ones fade? That's not coincidence. That's engineering. See, memory isn't just mental, it's magnetic. Pain etches deeper. Trauma holds charge, and they've built a grid that captures it. The towns like Ashford's Hollow were early anchors, sacrificed to prime the frequency. But now, that same signal is embedded in ads, curriculum, therapy, religion. You're not healing, you're looping, and every loop deepens the spiral. The Hollow lives in systems now, and the men who built them. They wear suits, not robes. They hold bank accounts, not daggers. But their loyalty is the same. Because once you serve the Hollow, you stop seeing people as human, you see them as fuel. We were taught to pity them. The children born on blood moons, taught to believe they were innocents, ripped from cribs and burned to ash in some backwoods tragedy no one dared to document. But that's the cover story. The acceptable horror. The truth. They didn't die. They changed. Some were taken underground, through those tunnels beneath Ashford's Hollow. Others were delivered to orphanages that no longer exist. Programs with names like Larkwood, Project Red Veil, the Chrysalis Rooms. Not funded by the state, funded by foundations. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Astor, the same families who philanthropically shaped modern medicine, education, and mental health. Why? Because they knew. Children born under the blood moon don't forget like others do. They remember sounds they've never heard. They draw symbols they've never been taught. They speak to things no one else sees, and those things answer. But here's where it gets darker. They weren't just studying the children. They were activating them, using isolation, electromagnetic fields, sound loops, trauma repetition, to awaken something ancient buried in their DNA. Not human instinct, not higher consciousness, something older. And if you think that sounds too far-fetched, listen closely. In 1973, a man named Dr. Eli Cross published a classified report for DARPA titled Cognitive Containment Protocols for Liminal Neurological Subjects. He referred to the blood moon children as biotemporal singularity hosts. Translation? They weren't born into time. They were inserted into it, placed at strategic intervals during peak lunar alignments to disrupt continuity, to open cracks in the false timeline, to rethread the spiral. That's why entire towns vanished, why records dissolved, why mothers were institutionalized. It wasn't about saving the children, it was about containing what they could become. But some escaped, some slipped through, and they grew up, changed names, integrated. Many don't even remember who they are, not yet. But they're waking up, and you've probably met one. You may be one. That pressure you felt all your life, that sense of being watched, of remembering things you were never told, that wasn't paranoia, that was recognition. And now the signal is live again. The Hollow was never just a town, not a location, not a myth, not a massacre. It was a machine. Not made of metal or gears, but of belief, trauma, and memory. A spiritual algorithm built to rewrite human consciousness through one thing: pain. But not just any pain. Initiation pain, the kind that breaks a man, and then shows him something else. You've felt it. That moment of collapse when everything inside you shatters. When your identity, your beliefs, your entire sense of self melts into ash. And yet, you didn't die. You awoke. That's what the Hollow was built to do. Not to destroy people, but to strip them, down to the soul, down to the signal beneath personality, because beneath all the programming, there's something ancient, something that remembers. See, the Hollow is a resonance field, a spiritual crucible buried in geography designed to trigger the latent code buried in human DNA. That code, it's not from Earth, it's older. The spiral is the symbol of its function. And like all spirals, it pulls you inward, not to trap you, to forge you. Because the hollow doesn't just burn babies, it burns away the lie that we're weak, that we're small, that we were ever just human. The reason they fear the blood moon children is because they carry a flaw in the matrix. A signal that can't be silenced, a truth that can't be programmed. They are reminders. Living mirrors of what we used to be before the control grids, before the veils, before the rewrite, and every blood moon is a sync event, a scheduled reawakening. That's why the elite react with such violence. Because every time the hollow awakens, so does something inside you. And if you make it through the fire without turning back, you don't return the same. You return with sight. Not just of what they've done, but of what you can become. This is why they built systems to keep you numb, why your life is filled with synthetic highs, empty rituals, and quiet despair. Because if even one man remembers the truth, the entire prison collapses. They didn't need to keep Ashford's Hollow alive to keep the ritual going. They just needed to modernize it. Take the architecture of fear, pain, and silence, and wrap it in white walls, smiling faces, and six-figure branding. Today, the Hollow doesn't burn babies in basements. It turns children into patients. It turns seekers into clients. It wraps trauma in terms like disorder, treatment plan, and self-care journey. They've monetized initiation and neutralized it. You don't scream anymore. You vent. You don't awaken. You cope. This is the new Hollow, the therapeutic industrial complex, the antidepressant pipeline, the influencer healing circuit, all of it designed to trap you right before the spiral opens. Because what if the breakdown wasn't a failure? What if it was your door? A crack in the simulation, a glitch in the mask they've spent centuries shaping. You see, every man carries a core wound, and in ancient traditions, that wound was the beginning of power, the place where the false self dies and the real one emerges. But today, you're told to cover it, medicate it, talk around it in endless loops, never going deep enough to reach the signal beneath. Because if you did, you might stop obeying, you might stop consuming, you might start seeing. That's the real reason our institutions drown you in distraction. It's not about health, it's not about safety, it's about containment. They can't let you descend into the spiral on your own, because that descent, it's where men reclaim sovereignty, and a sovereign man can't be marketed to. He can't be manipulated, he can't be ruled, so they surround you with soft chains, mindfulness apps, safe spaces, shadow work sold by billionaires, but none of it touches the deep code, because the Hollow isn't out there anymore. It's in you. Every time you swallow your rage, every time you silence the scream, every time you choose comfort over truth, you feed it. But if you ever stopped, if you ever stepped into the pain fully, the Hollow would burn, and you would rise. The spiral wasn't meant to trap you. It was meant to awaken you, but only if you had the will to walk it alone. No maps, no handrails, no promises, just the pull, deeper and deeper into the unmaking of everything you were told to be. Because the spiral is not a path through time, it's a path through identity. And those who reach the center, they don't come back with answers. They come back with sight. See, here's the final truth. The Hollow didn't burn babies to erase them. It burned them to extract something, a signal, a frequency. The spiral wasn't just spiritual, it was biological. Every blood moon child carried a dormant key, a genetic anomaly the old bloodlines feared. They called it the primordial spark. It only activates under trauma, only in solitude, only in men and women who are broken wide enough to let something ancient move through. Not a demon, not an angel, something that precedes both. A force that doesn't ask you to bow, or to beg, or to believe. It only asks one thing: burn everything that is not you. And that is the system's greatest threat. Because if even one man lights that spark, it spreads. Not through teaching, through recognition, like a tuning fork striking bone. Other men wake up. They see behind the curtain. They remember their true name. And suddenly, the throne is empty. The priesthood crumbles. The algorithm fails. The hollow starves. Because the spiral doesn't end in madness. It ends in liberation. That's why they smeared it, branded it satanic, buried it beneath folklore and fear. They want you terrified of dissent, afraid of your own shadow, ashamed of your pain. But dissent is how men are forged, not in temples, in fire. And when you walk into that spiral willingly, you don't come out human. You come out sovereign, the kind of man who can't be owned, controlled, erased. And if you've made it this far into this spiral, then maybe, just maybe, that spark is already lit in you. Now listen, this next part isn't for everyone. If you felt nothing, if this was just a story to you, entertaining, forgettable, then walk away. Go back to the feed. Scroll. Sleep. Numb. But if something inside you is shaking right now, if your skin feels tight, your stomach twisted, your chest heavy, then you already know you're not the same. Not after this. The spiral has begun unraveling everything false inside you. You've seen behind the curtain, heard the echoes no one dares to speak, felt the weight of truths you were never meant to carry. And now you face a choice. You either turn back, or you mark the moment. Because transformation only locks in through ritual. So I'm going to ask you to do something most won't. Not because it's trendy, not because it helps the algorithm, but because it's a seal. A declaration to yourself and to the unseen forces watching that you will never go back. Scroll down, right now. And in the comments, write this phrase: Ashes remember. Write it twice. Once for the part of you that was erased, and once for the part of you that will never be forgotten. Let it echo, let it pull others in, let it wake the ones who are still silent. Because this isn't just a story about a town, or a fire, or children lost to madness. This is about you, your fire, your spiral, your war with the false world that's caged you since birth. They tried to program you, to shame your instincts, to dose your emotions into silence. But you're remembering. And when enough men remember, when they stop medicating their shadows and start walking through them, the world changes. Not by vote, not by protest, not by reform, but by fire. You were never meant to heal by numbing. You were meant to rise by burning. So if this has touched you, if it cracked something in your chest, then seal the transformation. Comment it now. Ashes remember, ashes remember. This is your mark. This is your return. You think the spiral died in Ashford's Hollow? You think the fires went out in 1871? No, they just put on suits. They walked into courtrooms, into seminaries, into Ivy League halls and boardroom walls, and they kept the ritual alive. Not with blood and ash, but with rules, with systems, with oaths of silence. Because the spiral didn't vanish, it evolved, it institutionalized. The same geometry, the same pattern, the same descent into voluntary obedience. You see it in the courthouses that call themselves sacred, in the pulpits that speak of light but answer to shadows, in the universities where they don't teach you to think, but to remember the correct lies. The spiral is now hidden behind credentials, clearance levels, tenure. The deeper you go in their world, the more you're told. Trust us. It's classified. You wouldn't understand. But underneath all the prestige is the same old spell: silence or burn, obey, or lose everything, just like in Ashford. They've rebranded the Hollow into a nationwide cathedral. Its new sermons: science, progress, security. But the altar is the same. Sacrifice the real for the acceptable. Bury the instinct. Murder the wild spark inside. Every diploma you hang, every paycheck you earn, every law you respect, it's a layer of the spiral, designed to make you forget the one thing they cannot afford for you to remember: you are not theirs, and the spiral doesn't belong to them. It was ours long before they weaponized it. It's a blueprint, a map, a passageway back to the original fire. But only if you stop worshipping the systems, only if you stop bowing to the language of your own enslavement. They can't burn you now, so they shame you, they cancel you, they exile you from their false heaven if you speak the ancient truth. But that exile, that's your initiation. That's the first step of the spiral. And the moment you take it, alone, unafraid, and fully awake, you are no longer theirs. You become the fire. They thought time would bury it. That if enough decades passed, if the fires cooled, the land repopulated, and the story faded into myth, no one would ever notice the pattern returning. But the spiral is not history. It's cyclical. It doesn't move forward. It rotates. And every rotation brings back the blood moon. You've seen it, haven't you? That strange red light cast across the earth. The way people feel it in their bones but don't know why. The unease, the agitation, the insomnia. Something ancient is stirred, because the blood moon is not just a sky event, it's a signal to the old architects, the ones who built the Hollow, the ones who wrote the Black Book of Silence passed through bloodlines, churches, and courts. When the blood moon rises, they don't sleep, they watch, because they know that certain bloodlines carry remnants of the spark, and when that moon glows red, those remnants activate. Old memories flash in dreams, symbols return in sketches, a fire stirs behind the eyes of the forgotten, and every time the system moves quickly. New distractions, new crises, new pills and new wars to drown out what they feel rising from beneath. But this time, it's not working, because too many men are waking up, too many cracks in the simulation, too many echoes of the Hollow surfacing in hidden documents, leaked tapes, buried confessions. The spiral is opening again, not as a place, but as a mass initiation. And this time, they can't contain it, because the blood moon doesn't just mark danger, it marks return. The return of the original pattern, the original flame, the original knowing that no priest, no psychologist, no professor could ever explain. You feel it, don't you? The pressure building behind reality. It's not paranoia, it's memory. The spiral is remembering itself through you, and the blood moon. It's not a warning. It's a summons. A call to the men who were always meant to walk the spiral back home, not to safety, but to sovereignty. You've come this far. Not everyone does. Most stop at the edge of discomfort. Most retreat when the lies feel safer than the truth. Most need a world where someone else is still in control. But you kept walking. So now it's time you met the architect. Not a man, not a group, not even a species. But a consciousness, older than religion, smarter than empire, hungrier than death. It doesn't wear a face. It doesn't need worship. It only needs one thing to survive. Agreement. Every law you obey without question, every belief you inherit without testing, every fear you silence instead of confronting. That's agreement. And every time you agree with a lie, no matter how small, you feed it. Because the architect doesn't rule through war, it rules through mirrors. It reflects your trauma back at you until you call it personality. It whispers guilt into your instincts until you label them sin. It feeds you stories until you forget your origin. And then, you do its work for it. You censor yourself, you conform, you abandon the spiral before you even know you're on it. This force, call it the hollow, the system, the echo, the phantom, it doesn't need to kill you. It just needs to keep you distracted. Distracted from the fire in your gut, the howl in your DNA, the feeling that something doesn't fit. Because the moment you stop agreeing, the moment you look in the mirror and say, "That's not me," the whole game collapses. The center isn't a monster. The center is you, before the programming, before the shame, before the broken inheritance passed down like a curse. The spiral didn't lead to destruction, it led to remembrance. That's why they hid it. That's why they burned the newborns. That's why they fear the blood moon. Because if even one man makes it to the center and remembers, it spreads, not by force, by frequency. And now, after 150 years of silence, that frequency is rising again. And you, right now, are tuning in. So what now? You've seen it, heard it, felt it. The spiral's not a story anymore. It's in you. And here's what they never told you. Once you've walked it, you can't go back. Not to who you were. Not to what you believed. Not to the numbness you used to call peace. Your relationships will change. Your habits will die. Your language will sharpen. And the world, it will begin to reveal itself. You'll see the masks people wear, not with judgment, but with precision. You'll hear the emptiness in conversations designed to distract. You'll feel the energy shift when someone lies, because your system is no longer tuned to obedience. It's tuned to resonance. And resonance doesn't care about popularity, safety, or social survival. It only cares about truth. Your presence becomes radioactive to the false. People will either wake up near you or flee, and you'll let them. Because once you've remembered who you are, you don't negotiate your signal. You amplify it. That's what the spiral gives you. Not comfort, not superiority, but clarity. The clarity to see through every illusion, the discipline to stop feeding the machine, the power to burn your old life without asking permission. They'll call you dangerous, too intense, too serious, too different, good. Because the world doesn't need more adjusted men. It needs men who've died to the lie and come back clean, men who remember the fire, the children, the hollow. Men who know that every system, every religion, every media outlet, every school was built not to educate you, but to erase you. But now you know, you've walked the spiral. And when others see you, they'll feel something they can't explain, a gravity, a stillness, a heat that unnerves and awakens. You won't have to say a word, because your frequency will speak for you, and the world will begin to bend around your presence. Like it once did for the priests of the old fire, like it once did before the hollow rose, like it will again, because you are not finished. You've come full circle. But this isn't a return, it's an eruption. The man who began this journey is gone. What remains is something older and far more dangerous. Because now you carry the forbidden pattern inside you. The spiral is no longer a symbol. It's a weapon, a compass, a code that burns through illusion with ruthless precision. And with that power comes a final decision. Remain silent or become the fire. Because the truth? They were never afraid of the rituals. They were never afraid of the blood. They were afraid of what happens when one man refuses to forget. That man becomes unpredictable, unafraid, uncontrollable. He becomes a mirror too sharp for others to look into. He walks into rooms and the lie trembles. Not because he fights, but because he remembers. That's what you are now. A living memory of something they tried to erase from the world. You are the blood they couldn't burn, the spiral they couldn't seal, the child they couldn't silence. You've crossed the center and returned bearing flame. And now you have a choice: to dim it so others feel safe, or to burn so fiercely they're forced to wake up or run. You already know the answer. Because men like you don't go back to sleep. They go forward. Through institutions, through illusions, through every wall meant to cage their signal. And when they speak, not with anger but with clarity, the world splits, not with violence, but with truth. And here, at the spiral's edge, I leave you with this. If you've felt the fire in these words, if you've heard the echo of something buried now rising in your bones, comment this phrase below twice. I carry the spiral. I carry the spiral. This is not for me. It's for you. To lock the transformation into language. To mark yourself as one who remembers. To tell the algorithm of this world, you are not asleep anymore. Let them track it. Let them watch. Because it's too late. You've seen the hollow. You've walked the spiral. And now, you are the flame.